Harold Levin, Staffing Manager at SmartStaff Personnel. How are you doing this evening?
Doing okay. As you noticed, Rabbi, in the background, the sun's shining in New Jersey. So that's a positive right now.
It is such a blessing when it happens.
Absolutely. We'll take any positives we can get in the world right now.
I'm so glad that you are joining us to give us both an overview of where things are at, as well as some do's and don'ts and things everybody should be considering in this time of real economic uncertainty. So let's start with what you're seeing in the job market right now. What's it looking like out there other than those unemployment numbers we see?
It's kind of odd because not all my clients have disappeared. Some of the placement that I do personally is temporary or contract. Some of it is permanent positions. Companies don't seem as ready to make a long-term commitment right now, which is not unusual when there's any sort of slump or distress going on in the economy. They tend to look more at what they need to get by day to day. Some clients are slowing down because they've sent their main core back to home to work. Other clients, like I happen to work with a quarry that manufactures road materials. And at least in New Jersey, even though most construction is being shut down, keeping the infrastructure fresh is important. So that particular company is still maintaining staff and actually screening staff that they can bring in over the coming weeks based on business. What I'm seeing are some companies are being proactive though and saying, whatever day the governor of New Jersey tells us we can go back to work, or the governor of New York, what are we going to need to get up and running? How far behind are we going to be? Are we going to need people? Other companies are saying, oh my gosh, the world's come to an end. We're not doing anything. We're just going to sit back and wait. So it's kind of a mixed bag.
And when you are on the receiving end of some bad news, that mixed bag is extraordinarily frustrating, right? So as these efforts to preserve health and physical well-being continue, more and more people are going to be facing furloughs and layoffs. What would you say? What advice would you have to offer someone who's just received that news?
Well, I think the distinction of layoff versus furlough, layoff concerns me more because layoff, even though they say it could be temporary, tends to have a permanent stigma to it. And furlough tends to mean, I think, just that. I'm hoping for most people that it's companies taking a step back because if they're not functioning and operating, they have to try and control expenses a little. And if they're the type of business where someone can't necessarily work from home or be a critical employee needed from home, they've got nothing for people to do. I would hope furloughs, as soon as the government starts releasing some of the restrictions and says it's okay to have people come back to work, those will be more short-lived. The ones that are being outright laid off, I worry about. And I think it depends on the industry. Manufacturing industry, it's going to depend on where the business world is once we start reopening. Are companies going to start placing orders right away, or are companies going to hold back? What products are we going to need people working in? What products, like I could see the automotive industry being way behind for a while because I'm sure they have a lot of cars sitting, waiting to ship that have no place to go. So if you're in that type of industry, it might be a while. If you're in medical device industry, medical research, pharmaceutical, I have a feeling things are going to ramp up very, very fast because that's where the focus is right now on how we get back into a healthier world and country.
It's interesting thinking about the role consumer sentiment is going to play in this, or not only what industries are going to be most needed, but also where people are going to be spending their limited dollars.
And that's the big question. I think that depends too a lot on how long this drags. I've seen reports that some governors and branches of our federal government seem to think May 1st we can start rolling out a slow recovery. Others are saying July. I saw one report that said a year from September, which I think would be absolute disaster. Uh, Health and well-being is important, but I think at the same time, if there's certain fields that can reopen, there's going to be a need to do that because you can't keep everything at a grinding halt. But my question is going to be, as things reopen, are people going to be comfortable going back out right away, or is there going to be a lot of fear, probably justifiable fear, unfortunately? Are people going to say, I just don't want to do my field anymore? I'm around people too much. I'm going to try something else, which is going to open jobs for other people. Are companies going to see everybody come back right away and jump in and we get back to business as usual? Are some smaller businesses going to reopen? And that's a big concern of mine. As more and more, even though we have more mega companies, we also have a lot of small startups and mid-sized companies that really live order to order, and how much damage has been done to them already or will be done. And I'm just not sure where that's going to go. I don't think any of us can. I kind of compare it to the crash that hit in 2008 and the crash that hit, I think, about 1987. And is this one going to be harsher? Or because people realize there's an end in sight to this at some point, is there enough optimism and more technology to get us running quicker? And I think you're going to see distance work, remote work was starting to fade for more and more companies that I talk to. They wanted everybody at their desk every day for accountability, and they just felt team spirit. I think maybe the last month we've learned that a lot of work can be done long distance and still get done effectively with periodic meetings, maybe in-person check-ins, but it depends what field you're in. Some fields, you got to be there and touch and feel what you're doing.
It is interesting to think about the ways this new reality is going to permanently change the landscape. So you did a really good job, I think, dividing between furlough and layoff, right? And I imagine, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if you've been furloughed, the advice is to hunker down, cut your finances as much as possible, and stay the course. But what if you've been laid off? What should you be doing right now to begin preparing for when this is over?
Being proactive. Something I tell people every day, and it's hard to hear sometimes at the start, but if you've been laid off, take a day or two, breathe, and then start putting your plan together. Now, granted, a lot of interviews are not going to happen till things start functioning a little, but depending on the field you're in, it is possible to have some preliminary phone interviews, Skype interviews, Zoom interviews, something along those lines. But you need to start, unless you're very lucky, when you're laid off, you don't start getting interviews the next day in a perfect economy. You need to lay your groundwork. First thing is making sure your resume is current, accurate, readable. It functions in a way that it's a advertising brochure for you. Getting networking going, and networking doesn't mean every day getting up, going to NetTems or Monster, whoever you might choose, and using them for to get job leads. It means getting your network going, contacting people who you maybe haven't talked to in years. First thing is, everybody, whether they're job seeking or not, should really have a LinkedIn profile these days. LinkedIn is probably the best professional social media engine, even though it's changed a lot in the last couple of years. Still pretty good place. Start checking your friends' networks, looking for people in the field that you might want to get connected to, writing everyone you know on LinkedIn or any other sources you have, whether they're former colleagues, former bosses, former customers, former clients, your rabbi or your priest, your neighbors, anybody you can find. If you're looking for work, if you're out of work, hiding it is the worst thing you can do. You need to make sure everyone knows you're looking. Everyone possible has your resume. You never know. The rabbi of our congregation sends me and a few other people notes every time someone comes to him and says they're out of work. It says, can you help them or aim them at anyone? There are, even though a lot of job search networking groups, and I'm sure the same is true in the Pittsburgh area as in Central Jersey, have shut down their in-person meetings because it's just not safe right now. A lot of networking groups are meeting online. Shop around and look for networking groups that you can maybe join a webinar and find out what's going on out there. There's so many things you can do to prepare yourself so that the day the region or the country reopens, you're not starting that day. You need to jump ahead. I'll throw in also a precarious time right now for college seniors. They really got the rug pulled out from under them because most college students don't really start thinking about job searching to the last 8 or 9 weeks of college. In other words, after spring break, and kaboom, they were back home. And even though career services offices might be available remotely, and I recommend every college student contact, I should say, their career service office, they're probably stretched and overwhelmed. College students should be starting, if they're graduating, to start marketing themselves, start researching where they can go now too, because we're going to have a flood of people entering the market that need new jobs because their old jobs aren't returning terribly quick. And then we're going to have all these new college seniors coming out at the same time. And this is a log jam. May is usually not one of the busiest hiring months, but I think May, June, July could be this year because, quite frankly, people stopped doing much the latter half of February, anticipating. Most people in this country realized that something bad was about to happen, I think, and started toning down a little bit what they were doing. But all of a sudden, all these people are going to be flooding the market. So being proactive and start now, start contacting people, see if people who are, go on and do some research at companies. If anybody's answering their email and says, you could say to them, I know you probably don't know what your job market's going to look like in a month or two, but would you have time for maybe a 15-20 minute chat with me over the phone or online, just so I can hear a little bit about what your company does and what opportunities you typically would have. So I say both unemployed and soon to be graduates about jobs need to get looking at it. The other advice I give is if you can find work similar to what you did, even if it's not exactly what you did, or for grads, maybe a step lower than all your professors were saying you're going to find a job, look at it. Also keep in mind money, which hasn't really recovered from 2008 terribly well, is probably going to stay flat now for a year or two as far as pay rates. The trick is to get working. Once you're working, it's easier to make that next step than it is if you're not.
As I was teasing this out to the community, I received a really interesting and very heartbreaking question from someone who said, it's been a long time since I've done this. Do people even use cover letters anymore? So whether you want to address the cover letter question specifically, or the broader question of, if it's been a while, what has changed in your
Mhm.
field over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years?
Well, as I said to you before we started, about within a synagogue, you have many different opinions. Within the staffing world and the coaching world, you have many different opinions on the value of cover letters. Personally, and I'll be very blunt, I don't even read cover letters when they come to me unless I go to a resume and it's lacking A, contact information, B, it's such a disorganized resume that I'm not sure what the person's trying to do. Then I might go back and scan the cover letter. Cover letters are sometimes important if a requirement that's posted states must have a cover letter. Some industries are more like, I know a lot of educational institutions like to see cover letters. Uh, a lot of not-for-profits tend to like cover letters because I think, especially in not-for-profits, sometimes it's the things not written in the resume that might be intangibles that could help you get a job. Uh, but if you're writing a cover letter, it needs to be to the point. And if the cover letter includes work history that's not in the resume, then there's something wrong with your resume. Where the cover letter is nice, if they'll sometimes say, please state why you're interested in this job. Then you want to say, well, as you see in my resume, I've done such and such for the last 15 years. But you might also want to know that in my second life as a volunteer, I did fundraising. I see you're a nonprofit that wants somebody with an accounting background, which this fictitious candidate would have. But I also worked very hard for Boy Scouts of America or United Jewish Fund or whatever it might be, helping them raise money for the last 10 years. So I can bring you both the hands-on skills you need and that intangible that you want everybody to have in their mentality. What's changed? If someone hasn't worked 15 to 20 years, they're probably a little hesitant about media like we're using tonight. They're probably not so sure about using social media, the post resumes and to do job searches. Is it okay to have a Twitter account? How much weight should I put into LinkedIn? How much information do I put out on search engines? And it's kind of breaking that barrier of fear and hesitancy, knowing that most employers now don't want a snail mail, hard copy, fancy paper resume. They want something that they can scan quickly on through the internet and then save it if it fits them. Uh, Knowing that most jobs are not going to be, in your case, in the Post Gazette, around here, the Newark Star Ledger anymore. When I first started recruiting in the 80s, the first firm I worked for took all the rookie recruiters, and our job every week, we were each given a section of the classifieds to break down and look for trends in companies that were hiring. Back then, the classified ads could be 30, 40 pages every Sunday. Now, in most newspapers, they're 2, 3, 4 pages because people don't use newspapers anymore. The other thing that's different now is more and more jobs are never even posted online. You have to find your way into companies, do more door opening and networking, like the modern version of cold calling, researching companies. And that's where LinkedIn comes in. Read articles about companies, look for companies that might interest you in the area where you work and the area where you live, and look for people, search the companies, look for, depending on the type of job you're looking for, the director of information systems, the human resources manager, the director of marketing. Try and connect to them. Tell them what you're doing. You need a job. Don't be bashful. Some will ignore you. Some might write you. Some might refer you to someone. But you got to be aggressive about it. No one's going to just, unless you're lucky, no one's going to hand you job openings. It's not that type of market.
Sure. We've received a question online about using this opportunity for continuing education, or specifically online tutorials to boost your skill set. Any that you would highly recommend? Any that you would caution people to stay away from? How important is familiarity with the Microsoft Office suite or other software programs right now?
Any technology skills, especially if you haven't been in the job market in 15, 20 years, any fresh technology skills you can pick up are good. Um, Look for, if you can, schools. I would start with schools where you live that maybe have online programs like local, again, depends the type of skills they're looking for. Local community colleges sometimes run short courses online on things like you mentioned, Microsoft Office or web development, Java. If you're doing anything financial and you haven't learned QuickBooks, and I would think this would apply to Pittsburgh as well as it would here where I am, QuickBooks has become so important to know and not just be able to enter into it, to be able to move around and work in QuickBooks. It's kind of like Microsoft Excel was 10, 15 years ago when nobody was comfortable. QuickBooks has become a very hot tool. Um, Understanding if you're going to work in an office environment, if you work like in a doctor's office, perhaps look for a school online that can give you some knowledge of the current medical coding terminology. Medical coding and billing seems to change about every 2 years. And if your company where you're working, your employer hasn't moved with the times, you may want to learn things like that. I would be hesitant of companies that look like they're very new that are offering training. I would try to find accredited programs, accredited schools. Uh, Sometimes you can check with your Department of Labor and Unemployment. Sometimes they have tutorials or schools they recommend. Sometimes if you're on unemployment, they'll pay for you to go pick up refresher courses. But if you're just furloughed or hesitant about what's going to happen, look for some online tutorials. There's a lot of them out there. And like I said, if you can find one local based, just give you a sense of comfort, but always research the company. Try and see if you can find reviews and make sure it looks legitimate. And one that charges little or nothing. Be careful if somebody starts talking thousands of dollars to take a 4 or 5 session Microsoft course. I'd be a little worried about that.
Thank you. You know, I'm a long way from teaching Talmud here, and this is a new medium for me. What haven't I thought to ask? What other advice do you have for people who are joining us?
I think the first thing is not to panic. Um, this is a really weird time. None of us have lived through anything like this. I wasn't around in the early 1900s when the pandemic hit Philadelphia, and I think it was Chicago especially. And I'm sure probably nobody tuning in was. Um, we don't know where this is going to go. I don't think we're looking at something quite as bad as the Great Depression. But I think you have to keep your antenna up. Try not to listen to all the news that's painting gloom all the time. Look for any positive news you can find. One source of positivity seems to be watching Governor Cuomo from New York. He seems to be able to spin things, but spinning is somewhat important because if you get in too big of a slump, that starts to reflect on how you go about things. But being proactive again, not sitting back and waiting for miracles to happen. You got to create some of your own miracles. Job search is always what you put into it, is what you're going to get out of it. If you do have to look, if you're on furlough, try to keep in touch with your company. A lot of them probably have sent everybody home, but if you can text or email colleagues and or superiors and find out what they're thinking, what they're hearing, let them know you're out there, see what you can do to maybe help from home. Is there anything you need me to do? Anyone you need me to call? Just showing that you're still there, you're still part of it, you're supportive, you understand it wasn't personal, that you've been given some time off, and what can we do to keep things together? I think that's probably the most important thing. I think the second most important thing is keeping your head screwed on and just stay in the right direction about everything, but also use this time to give yourself a little mental break where you can. My wife and I have been getting out walking more than we've had in years because we have the time to do it. She's actually in the room right now listening, and she'll tell you she was amazed to find 2 dressers which had paperwork on them from years gone by, sorted this week. Get yourself organized, make yourself a little bit fresher, so that you're not just totally downtrodden and exhausted mentally when this whole period ends. It's easy to be exhausted right now, especially if you focus on everything going on in the world. It is very exhausting, and every 5 minutes we're being told something different. But try and keep yourself focused on your well-being right now. It's not easy. I think it's kind of a good thing that Passover and Easter fell when they did, because A, there's some biblical perspective that ties into what's going on in the world right now, but B, it gave us a little distraction, even though we all celebrated differently. For me, one of my best distractions this time of year is usually the start of the baseball season, and trying to find things to make me forget I'm not into watching the Phillies lose 30 years ago, being a Phillies fan. I'm sure Pirate fans are happy that they're we're a Pirate fan's probably saying, wow, we're undefeated right now. So there's a positive. But finding things to distract you. I mean, this time of year, people like to plant gardens as it warms up. Nothing says you can't go outside and turn the dirt over. Go out and do it. Try and keep your brain fresh. I did get some expert advice passed to me from the side here from a library director who's in the room, that libraries are good resources once they're up and running, or even electronically, of search tools and ways to research companies. And they have computers and internet, so unfortunately you can't afford to keep your internet running if your time out of work gets longer. Once libraries are up and running, you can use their resources, and they have a lot of good online resources that if you go to their websites, things like Refs USA, which are just tools that libraries have where you can research companies, look for directors and things. Staying focused is the big thing right now. You can't fall to pieces.
Only because of how true it was, I'm going to let you get away with that Pirates crack. It's maybe the first undefeated April and probably May in a long, 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 long time.
Well, I think I read if they come up with this convoluted system of Arizona and Florida, the Pirates and Phillies could be in the same division this year, which means one of them can't be in last place. Which one that will be, I don't know.
Spots. You just have to find them.
Yes, I just don't know. And but as much as I know our president would love to get sports running because he thinks it'd be good for everybody's mood, and I think the big thing here is we all have to sit tight and hope and pray this starts to. The numbers I saw today showed me some hope that the creation of new cases seems to be going down a little, but it's taken a lot of sacrifice to get here, and it's tough. And I think we're all in this boat together right now. It's kind of bizarre.
You are absolutely right. Harold Levin, staffing manager at SmartStaff Personnel, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
My pleasure. And I wish everybody who's watching this all the best and good continuance of Passover.